I've just joined the National Key Lab of Cognitive Neuroscience and Learning, and also the IDG McGovern Institute last year. So it was my great pleasure to uh, attending this symposium and to share some of our recent work with you. So this symposium named From Cells to Cognition. So the timeline of today's talk is also from cells in the morning session and in the afternoon to the cognition. And what I'm going to, and also from animals to humans. And what I'm going to talk about is some higher level cognition, that is a social cognition. So when coming to humans, we are characterized as the animal and the social animals. We experience the most complicated emotional experience and also the most complicated social interactions, such as today's symposium is also a social interaction. So I'll talk about this higher level cognition, and this is the affective and social cognition. And this is also the main interest of our research group in Peking University, or in Beijing Normal University. Excuse me for this typo because I graduate from Peking University, so somehow I feel affiliated. And today I'll talk about one theoretical model for oxytocin and a very simple behavior study, empirical study to illustrate my understanding of the function of oxytocin in social adaptation. So we live in a very complex social environment and rely strongly on the social interaction, social relationship, and the daily interactions. And impaired social functioning have negative impacts on the reproduction, human development, and mental health, and also well-being. So I'd like to give some background information about this neuropeptide oxytocin. We have recently proposed this neuropeptide oxytocin is a very important neuropeptide for individuals to adapt to such a changing dynamic social environment. And oxytocin is a very ancient, evolutionarily ancient and conservative neuropeptide, and also a hormone. It is synthesized in the magnocellular neurons in the PVN and SON nucleus, neurons in the hypothalamus, and also generated in the pulvinar secular neurons in the PVN, and projected and diffused to the VTA, amygdala, hippocampus, striatum, and cortex, and also brainstem. And oxytocin is noticed, the earliest notice for oxytocin is in its very basic reproductive and adaptive functions, such as sexual behaviors and also facilitation of birth. In animal and human studies, it has been recognized that oxytocin play a very important role in social relationship formation and also maintenance for the social relationship. It facilitates pair bonding, parental bonding, and also maternal behaviors. And more recently, it has been implicated in social cognition. So in human studies, oxytocin is intranasally administered, and intranasal administration of oxytocin has been shown to pass the blood barrier to reach the central system and influence our cognition and behaviors. Although it has been shown that a very small amount of oxytocin can intranasally administered can pass the blood barrier, but the amount we usually give to the participants is above the physiology dose. So in this way, intranasal oxytocin intranasal administration of oxytocin can show a very large range of human behaviors and the cognition and the brain function. So just give you some background information about the oxytocin effect on social cognition. So when we intranasally give oxytocin to humans, it has been documented that it can reduce our individual's subjective report of stress and anxious feelings, and also decrease the cortisol level to stress, especially when you have some social support, like when you have some friends aside and also give you some oxytocin, then you are good to go with the stress. And oxytocin also increase positive social interactions, such as increasing eye contact and also empathetic responses to others' pain, and also decrease the social distance between strangers. And oxytocin has also been shown to play an important role in social cognition and in the promotion of prosocial behaviors. So, while there are increasing number of studies examining oxytocin effect on human behaviors, the complexity of oxytocin has been recognized. The effect of oxytocin has been shown to has been shown to be sensitive to individual differences and also the processing context. Like what I mentioned, that oxytocin promote cooperation or prosocial behaviors, but this only restricted to like when you interact with in-group people, but not with out-group people. So this is the sensitivity to the processing context, and it's also sensitive to individual difference, as we can see like differential oxytocin effect between males and females, and also we show that different oxytocin effect with individuals with different cognitive style, like someone who likes think more about their decision, or they make intuitive decisions. So we propose this social adaptation model for oxytocin, according to which the multiple functional roles, as I mentioned, is actually reflecting the function of oxytocin in facilitating individuals' adaptive ability to the social environment. And I need to make it clear that I'm not saying like everything, every effect of oxytocin should be understood within this frame, but we just provide a perspective to look at the seemingly opposite oxytocin effect found in the literature. So I'll give you, we proposed like multiple psychological processes supporting the effect of oxytocin on social adaptation. And I'll give you an example to understand this frame. Like when we enter this room, what oxytocin do is to make the social cues more salient to you, increase the attentional or perceptual processes of the social cues. Social cues like you'll say who is the one that who would like to interact with you, or someone who's not interested in you. And also, when you initiate such social interaction, what oxytocin do is to reduce some stress or anxious feelings when you interact with strangers, or increase the rewarding experience from social interaction, so that within all those processes, oxytocin can help you to initiate some social interaction and to get some positive feedback from the social interaction. And we also review all the imaging studies to show the neural basis for these three psychological processes, but I'm not going to go into details of this review. Instead, I'll introduce you a recent meta-analysis we conducted on all the studies that combine the intranasal oxytocin and also functional imaging studies. This resulted in 59 studies that investigated the intranasal oxytocin effect on the brain activation. So this is the general effect of oxytocin. We can see like oxytocin increased the brain activations in the bilateral amygdala, bilateral caudate, and also in the superior temporal regions. That is the main regions of emotional processes and the social brain. And also, what we can see from here is oxytocin significantly reduced the activation in the amygdala and also the DACC. These regions are the key regions for saliency network and also for the negative emotion. One thing one may notice from this slide is the amygdala activation. We can see that amygdala activation is significantly increased and also decreased by oxytocin. That's a strange effect in the literature, and that has been recognized for a long time. So we want to reconcile this incongruent oxytocin effect within the social adaptation model. So when we do a further analysis on those studies, we can see that the studies showing oxytocin increase the amygdala activity is actually from the studies that that use the positive social stimuli, such as infant face or like attractive faces, and also like happy faces or social rewarding or collaboration with others. Whereas the decreased amygdala activation on the amygdala actually come from the studies that use the negative stimuli, such as angry face or fearful face or baby crying or social punishment. So this can be understood because like reducing the threatening experience and also increasing the rewarding experience, both are coming to the same end of facilitating your adaptation to the environment. And also, we analyze the oxytocin effect in the clinical population, and also give support to this model. For example, we analyzed two samples. One is the patient with autism disorder, and we show that oxytocin actually increased the activation in the social brain, in the social brain. Well, when we analyze the data from the patient with mood disorder like depression or anxiety, we show that oxytocin actually decreased amygdala activation. So this seems different effect on different clinical populations, but if we consider the baseline activation of these two populations, we can see a normalized effect of oxytocin, because autism are characterized with hypoactivation in the social brain network, and whereas the patient with mood disorder are characterized with hyperactivation in the negative brain regions. So both these effects suggested the normalization effect of oxytocin to the patient to resemble the patterns from the healthy subject. And next, I want to show you a recent intranasal oxytocin combining FMR study. After administration of oxytocin or placebo, females were scanned when they listening to infant cry. They are listening to the same set of infant crying, but these infant crying are labeled in two ways. One is saying like this infant is crying because he's sick. The other side is labeled as this infant is crying because he's just bored. And what they find is intranasal oxytocin increase the empathetic responses in the typical empathy-related regions, such as anterior insular and also the inferior frontal gyrus, to the infant cry, which is labeled as sick, but decrease these activations to the bored infant crying. So this is difficult to interpret, but within the social adaptation model, we can see that the opposite oxytocin effect on the same infant crying fits well with in that oxytocin flexibly adapts parenting responses to infant crying by promoting the responsiveness to the necessary need. That is the infant crying for sickness. You need to respond to that, otherwise some serious thing may happen, as well as to prevent parents from being overwhelmed when there's no urgency, such that the baby is just bored. If you respond to every baby crying because of their boredness, you will be exhausted. So in this way, we have a healthy parenting patterns modulated by oxytocin. So besides that, providing explanations for the inconsistent results, the social adaptation also promotes some predictions, such as the effect of oxytocin should depend on the adaptive value for that individual to have the direction of the oxytocin effect. And another prediction is we would think stronger oxytocin effect in the individuals who is less adapted to the environment. So my group is conducting several projects testing this hypothesis, and there are several ongoing neuroimaging studies. But today I will talk only about one recent behavior study testing this model, a very simple behavior study using oxytocin challenge. So in this study, we examined oxytocin effect on learning good news and bad news. When learning information, we manifest a asymmetric learning pattern. That is, we highlight and incorporate the good news into our beliefs, but discount or even ignore the bad news, especially when coming to the self and to the future. Like, we are future directed animals. We think more about the bright side of the future. So that's why people like Friday, because there's good things to expect for the weekend. But they don't like Sunday because for the future, although the Friday and Sunday itself is not different, or even Sunday is better, but with regarding to the future, people have this difference liking of these 2 days. And also, when thinking about the self, social psychologists have documented a well-known effect that is called the above average effect. When we have some estimation of the future things or even our trait, we show like most people think they are better than average, which is statistically impossible, but reflecting an optimistic bias when you estimating yourself or your own future. So such a optimistic bias is pervasive in human across age, gender, and also across culture. And this, although it is a bias in formation belief, but optimistic has been recognized as a very important psychological resources to buffer stress and to lower anxiety and to support our physical and mental health. So we tested the social adaptation model within this paradigm, within this frame. We would expect the oxytocin will increase such advantages mechanism underlying human behavior, and also more specific hypothesis about the bad news and good news. I won't go into details on this, but basically, we are testing the oxytocin effect when you are learning good news and bad news in 3 behavior studies. And because there's an increased criticize on the oxytocin effect on the behavior level. So we conducted a discovery and also a replication of the initial finding on the oxytocin effect on optimistic bias. So let me introduce the paradigm we use to investigating the optimistic bias. We use a two-stage belief updating task. In this task, we presented like all the negative things to the participants. And we asked participants to estimate how likely this negative event is going to happen to you in the future. And you can have an estimation. And then we give you a feedback. That is the average or the actual likelihood that is going to happen to an average person or to a normal population. Then what we are interested is after all the estimation in the first stage, we come into the second stage. We ask you to estimate the likelihood again. And we are interested how you make use of this estimation error to update your own estimation. So because all those events are negative events, so if I give you some feedback higher than your own estimation, that is a bad news. And if the feedback is lower than your own estimation, that is the good news. So we are interested how the good news and the bad news will influence your second estimation to see how the good news and bad news help you to update your own belief. So in both the discovery and the replication samples, we find that intranasal oxytocin has significantly increased subjects' optimistic bias. After the the oxytocin treatment, participants generally lower their estimation to experience such negative events. And then we ask where this effect come from. So we analyze the oxytocin effect for the good news and also for the bad news. And we can see that oxytocin increased your own update when you give some good news, but decrease your update when you got some bad news. Then, to further uncover the dynamic learning process, we examined the oxytocin effect on the learning rate. According to the formal learning theory, one update their belief based on the prediction error. That is, the large prediction error will predict large learning. And the prediction error here is calculated as a difference between your own estimation and the feedback I give to you. And the update is calculated as the difference between the two estimates. And first of all, we can see that subjects learn much more on the good news and the placebo, indicating that participants actually learn a lot better for the good news than the bad news. And moreover, we see a distinguished oxytocin effect on learning the good news and the bad news. We see oxytocin increase your learning tendency to the good news, but has no effect on the bad news learning. So because the learning occurs based on the estimation error, which is the difference between your own estimation and the feedback. So we further mirrored what Xiaohong has mentioned, the metacognition. We asked participants to do a metacognition on their estimation and also a second order of the feedback. That is how confident you are on your own estimation, and also how much would you accept the feedback I give it to you, so that we can dissociate the different cognitive processes involved in this learning process. So what we find is that oxytocin has increased the participants' acceptance of the good news, but has no effect on the bad news acceptance. And for the confidence, we can see that there's a general effect of oxytocin to increase your confidence for the second time. That is the difference between the confidence for the first time and second time. Moreover, oxytocin has increased to a large degree of the when you get some good news, you got really confident on your own estimation. So besides the prediction of this one, we also predict a stronger oxytocin effect in the individuals who is less adapted to the social environment. In this case, we defined the less adapted individual as those ones who are more depressed or anxious, because the optimistic bias is highly correlated with the symptoms related to depression and anxiety. And what we can see here is that indeed we find individuals' depressive symptom and also their anxiety trait modulated the effect of oxytocin on the optimistic bias. We show that oxytocin effect are only observed in the individuals who have higher score in the depressive symptom or have a higher score in the anxiety trait. But if we look at the individuals who have lower anxiety or depressive symptom, there's actually no oxytocin effect. So we have seen for many times the normalization effect of oxytocin. As mentioned above, the normalization of the abnormal activation for the patient to resemble the healthy controls, and also as mentioned, this task. This results, if we take another perspective, we can see under placebo, there's increased optimistic belief updating towards the bad news, increasing with the depressive symptom and also the anxiety trait. But what oxytocin do is diminish the relationship between the depressive and trait anxiety, and also the learning updating towards the bad news, such that by normalizing the hyper updating upon the bad news in those who have higher score. So, but all of those are related to the patient and also this trait. All of those are related to the clinical side. So our recent work has shown this normalization effect also in non-clinical related aspects. In this study, we are interested in the division of resources. So counterbalance between the benefits to your own self and to other people is actually a very fundamental decision to make for everyone. Thus, we conducted this pharmacological fMR study to reveal the neurocomputational mechanism underlying the effect of oxytocin effect on social value representation. So specifically, we are interested in how oxytocin influences the computations involved in the representation of the self-interest and other interest in two groups of individuals. One is a pro-social group who consider others in interest in the first place. And the other group is selfish individuals who consider one's own benefits in the first place. So I won't go into details of this study. It's just done, and we are preparing the data analysis and also the the paper. But basically, we find that a social space that framed by the self-interest and other interest is constructed based on subjective specific angle points, which is well aligned with individuals' social value orientation. And those are encoded in the amygdala and also VTA activity. This is a so we can see here the blue bar is the baseline differences between the prosocial and the selfish individuals. And what we demonstrated the oxytocin effect, the normalization effect of oxytocin on this process is making the selfish individuals less egocentric and making the prosocial individuals less allocentric by increasing amygdala and VTA activation, but decreasing that in the prosocial individuals. So we can see even in this decision-making task, a normalization effect of oxytocin between different types of individual can be also seen. So all those studies I mentioned lend further support for the social adaptation model. And our group would go further along this line by considering the mental disorder, computational modeling, and also its relationship to other molecules in this process. So coming to the end, I'd like to thank my collaborators and also the graduate students in the SAMP lab at Beijing Normal University. And thank you for your attention.